Have you ever sat there watching the news about the government potentially shutting down and thought, what is actually going on behind all that political theater?
Mm-hmm. Because that's kind of the big question, isn't it?
It really is. And that's exactly what we're tackling head on in this deep dive.
Yeah, we're going to try and take you inside a recent, pretty intense showdown in Washington, D.C. over the federal budget. It was like a high-stakes pressure cooker situation.
Right, and we want to help you understand what was really at risk there.
And to do that, we've been looking closely at the transcript from a really interesting YouTube video. It's from the Story-Driven English channel.
That's right, it's called Learning English through News Level 2 Congressional Deadlock, the battle over the budget. Now, don't let that title fool you.
No, not at all. It actually gives a surprisingly detailed and then pretty accessible look at this whole budget mess.
So our mission today really is to cut through some of the noise. We want to explain the complexities, introduce you to the key players involved.
And really break down the potential consequences, you know? What happens when Congress just can't agree on a budget? And hopefully do it without getting bogged down in too much political jargon.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture this. It's a crisp April evening in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
The famous cherry blossoms, they're just past their peak. You've got those beautiful pink and white petals starting to fall around the Capitol.
It's a lovely image.
It is, right? But inside those government buildings, well, the atmosphere is anything but peaceful. It's tense.
A real contrast, isn't it? That sort of outward serenity versus the internal tension.
Exactly. And right away, the story throws you into the middle of it with a few key individuals.
Yeah, people right at the heart of this budget battle.
First up, there's freshman Congressman Marcus Thornton from Ohio. He's pretty new to D.C., probably came in with a lot of ideals.
Like many do.
And suddenly he's facing this huge test with a budget. And his chief of staff, Eliza Watson, she's right there too, really emphasizing the urgency. They're basically staring down a potential government shutdown in less than a week if they don't get an agreement.
The clock is ticking loud.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then you have Representative Diana Chan from California. She's got more experience.
Yeah, she brings a different perspective.
And she's immediately raising some pretty serious red flags about the Republican budget proposal. Specifically, the economic projections.
What was it about her take that jumped out at you?
Well, for me, it was her focus on the actual numbers. She was pointing out that the projected revenues, especially from those proposed tariffs, they just didn't seem to add up.
Right.
She even mentioned the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and their estimates. They were talking about a potential revenue shortfall of billions. Billions.
It makes you wonder if everyone's even working from the same set of facts, doesn't it? It highlights that these aren't always just political disagreements about goals. Sometimes it's fundamental disagreement about the economic reality of it all.
And adding even more pressure, you've got President Trump's very firm stance. He's making it clear. No budget agreement gets signed unless it includes his priority funding.
Doesn't sound like much wiggle room there.
Not at all. And right in the middle, trying to juggle all this, is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. The video really gives you a sense of the incredibly difficult position he's in.
Oh, it's a tightrope walk. Absolutely.
You've got the Freedom Caucus, the very conservative group wanting even deeper spending cuts than what's on the table.
Pushing hard from one side.
And you've got the more moderate Republicans. They're worried, understandably, about a shutdown hitting their constituents, government services grinding to a halt.
And probably thinking about their own re-election chances, too, let's be honest.
Of course. So Johnson's trying to find some kind of middle ground, something that keeps both factions and the president happy. Not an easy task.
It really underscores the challenge of leading, well, any diverse group, but especially in Congress, with such a narrow Republican majority.
Exactly. They couldn't afford to lose many votes from their own side. If they did, they might have to look to Democrats for support.
But Representative Chan had already pointed out that wasn't likely with this proposal, right? Because of sticking points on things like immigration, environmental rules.
Yeah, too many non-starters for the Democrats in that initial version.
And then Representative Jackson Williams from Texas comes in. He's been around the block a few times.
He has, and his perspective is pretty direct.
Yeah, that comment about governing by crisis being the new normal, it's quite striking.
It is. A bit cynical maybe, but you hear that sentiment a lot.
Many would probably argue it's accurate, unfortunately. What did that phrase make you think?
It just makes you worry about the long-term stability, you know? Is this constant brinkmanship sustainable? And he wasn't exactly optimistic about Speaker Johnson's chances with this budget either.
No, he basically predicted it would fail, said it wouldn't satisfy the hardliners or the moderates.
And he mentioned their internal vote count, the whip count, right? Showing maybe 20 Republican defections.
At least 20, yeah. That's a huge red flag for leadership.
It is. And it all circles back to those real-world consequences we mentioned.
Right. It's easy to get lost in the D.C. maneuvering, but federal employees, contractors, families relying on services, they're the ones who feel the impact.
Absolutely. Something we should always keep in mind. So the stage is set for the first big vote in the House.
And the debate unfolds, well, pretty much as you'd expect along party lines.
Republicans talking fiscal responsibility, supporting the president's agenda.
Democrats hitting hard on the proposed cuts to social programs, environmental protections.
They also brought up those earlier tax cuts, arguing they added trillions to the debt while vital services were now on the chopping block.
It's that familiar clash of priorities, of ideologies. But the real drama was the outcome of the vote.
Yeah, that was the key moment. It was a big setback for Speaker Johnson. The budget resolution failed. 212 against, only 198 for.
And the really striking part.
24 Republicans. They crossed the aisle, joined all the Democrats to vote no.
Wow. That sends a pretty clear message.
A stinging rebuke, I think the video called it, and it felt accurate. It really weakened Johnson's position and the president's agenda right off the bat.
What does that kind of internal dissent signal, do you think, about the party at that moment?
It just screams lack of unity, right? Deep divisions about the best way forward. You've got these strong factions pulling in opposite directions. Makes it incredibly hard for leadership to find any consensus.
You can just imagine the mood after that vote.
Oh, yeah. The video shows Johnson immediately huddling with his leadership team. Those must have been intense conversations.
I bet. And then we see Congressman Thornton, the freshman.
Right. He has this interesting interaction with a veteran journalist, Catherine Reynolds.
And Thornton may be still holding on to some of that initial idealism.
He calls for more inclusive negotiations. He says a shutdown isn't inevitable, but it's going to take flexibility and compromise.
Sounds like he's trying to be optimistic, but acknowledging the reality.
Yeah. And then there's this visual moment where Thornton sees Speaker Johnson standing alone on what looks like a really tense phone call.
You just assume it's with the president, right?
I have to think so. You could almost feel the pressure in that shot.
And the next morning, things don't seem much better. President Trump goes to Twitter.
As he often does.
And he's critical of those, quote, weak Republicans who didn't back the budget. He doubles down on his border security demands.
And even sort of suggests a shutdown might focus their minds.
Not exactly a bridge-building message.
No, definitely more of a hardline approach.
Mm-hmm.
But Johnson, well, he has to try something, so he calls an emergency meeting of the Republican conference.
And presents a revised budget proposal, What were the key changes there? Was he trying to win back those defectors?
It looked like a bit of a balancing act. He kept most of the president's main priorities in, especially on spending levels.
Okay.
But offered a bit more flexibility on how the border security money would be used. They also adjusted those tariff revenue projections.
Acknowledging those earlier CBO concerns, perhaps?
Maybe. And they softened some of the really controversial environmental regulation rollbacks. It felt like he was trying to offer just enough to tempt some moderates back, but without losing the conservatives completely.
A delicate dance, trying to thread the needle.
But probably not enough to make everyone happy, right?
Exactly. Johnson himself basically said it wasn't perfect, but framed it as necessary to avoid a shutdown.
And the reactions. Predictable.
Very predictable. Some conservatives immediately cried foul, said he was caving. Moderates, on the other hand, still felt the changes didn't go far enough on their concerns.
Still stuck. Meanwhile, what were the Democrats up to? Seeing an opportunity here.
Oh, for sure. There was talk among Democrats about possibly supporting a clean continuing resolution, a CR.
Okay, explain that quickly for folks. A CR is...
It's basically a temporary funding bill. Keeps the government running at current levels for a set time, usually without major policy changes, just keeps the lights on.
Got it.
So, Democrats were floating the idea, maybe we support a clean CR if Johnson drops some of Trump's most controversial demands.
The potential bipartisan path out.
Potentially, but a huge risk for Johnson politically. Relying on Democratic votes could easily trigger a revolt from his right flank, maybe even cost him the speakership.
So the next few days sound like just a blur. Constant negotiations, press conferences.
Late night sessions, yeah. Everyone's scrambling as that shutdown deadline got closer and closer.
And President Trump.
Sure.
Still publicly firm.
Publicly, yes. Very firm. Though behind the scenes you heard whispers, rumors of maybe some private flexibility to avoid a shutdown. You never know what happens in those back rooms.
True. Then we get this really significant moment. Speaker Johnson asks to meet Congressman Thornton. Just the two of them.
Yeah, for a freshman, that's a pretty big deal. Suggests Johnson was maybe looking for a different perspective, someone not quite as entrenched.
And he even compliments Thornton, calls his approach thoughtful. Must have been interesting for Thornton.
I imagine so. And then Johnson just lays it out, the stark reality. 3 options, none of them good.
Oh, were they again?
Option 1, try another Republican-only budget vote. Likely fail again. Option 2, negotiate with Democrats, risk his speakership. Option 3, government shutdown.
Wow. Talk about being between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. And Johnson admits something interesting. He says he can't just rely on hints and suggestions from the president's team anymore. It's too risky.
He needs something concrete.
Right. He needs allies like Thornton, people who understand governing isn't just about ideological purity, who might help explain a necessary compromise, maybe a bipartisan one, to the rest of the caucus.
You can just feel the pressure ratcheting up on Johnson. News starts leaking about private meetings with Democratic leaders. Conservative media starts accusing him of betrayal.
While moderate voices maybe express cautious optimism.
And then boom, another tweet from President Trump expressing disappointment, talking about a potential surrender.
It's pressure from absolutely every direction. And hanging over all of it is that threat of a motion to vacate the speakership.
Explain that briefly, too. It's basically...
procedure in the House rules allowing any member to force a vote on removing the speaker. Historically rare, but in this climate, suddenly felt very possible.
Okay, so it all comes down to the final day. Emergency House session. Funding expires soon. What does Johnson do?
He stands up and announces they'll vote on a continuing resolution, that CR again, to fund the government for 60 days at current levels.
A temporary fix, kicking the can down the road, essentially.
Pretty much. But what were the details? Did it have any of those compromises?
It had some limited extra money for border security modernization, but crucially without the specific methods the president wanted.
Okay, a small concession, maybe.
It kept existing environmental rules in place for now, avoiding those rollbacks. And it set up a bipartisan commission to look at long-term fiscal challenges.
So trying to offer something to different sides, but mostly just keeping things level for 60 days.
Exactly.
And the reaction.
Immediate and divided, conservative hardliners were furious, called it a cave-in.
Moderates and Democrats. Probably surprised, maybe relieved.
A mix of both, I think. Relief that a shutdown was averted, at least for now. Johnson himself said, look, this isn't ideal, but it's the only thing likely to pass and keep the government open while we keep working.
And the final vote on the CR, what was the tally?
It passed, 275 in favor, 155 opposed.
And that coalition was interesting, right?
Very. Most Democrats voted yes, joined by enough moderate Republicans to get it over the line.
So Johnson prevents the shutdown.
But at a huge political cost.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly half his own Republican conference voted against him. Those calls for his resignation from conservative media got way louder. Wow. So in the immediate aftermath, Congressman Thornton offers Johnson tentative congratulations. What's the mood like?
Sounds like Johnson felt a mix of relief crisis averted, but also resignation about the political fight he knew was coming, maybe even about his own future as speaker.
He talked to the president, apparently.
Reportedly, yeah. The president wasn't happy, but was expected to sign the CR to avoid the shutdown, probably with a critical public statement.
And the CR still had to pass the Senate, of course.
Right, though that was seen as likely. But the big uncertainty was Johnson's hold on the speakership.
And as this is all happening, Thornton's reflecting. What's going through his mind?
He seems really struck by the deep, deep fractures in American governance, not just between parties, but within them too, and between Congress and the White House.
He recognized how tough Johnson's position was.
But also saw that the underlying conflicts, the reasons they got into this mess, they weren't resolved at all.
And the video notes, Trump did sign the CR with that critical statement.
Yep. And the political analysts immediately started debating what it all meant long term.
For Thornton, personally, this whole week seems like a big learning experience.
Definitely. That initial idealism is still there, maybe, but it's tempered now with a much clearer, maybe more sobering view of the practical realities of Washington, the compromises, the hurdles.
And that motion to vacate threat against Johnson. Did it happen?
It did, yeah. A bit later, maybe a week or so after the CR passed, a motion was brought forward.
And the result?
It failed. A combination of Democrats and moderate Republicans voted to keep him in place. But the fact that it happened and the vote wasn't overwhelming, it really showed his weakened authority. The divisions were still right there.
So the immediate crisis passed, but the instability remained.
Pretty much. And Thornton, when trying to explain this back home...
How did he put it?
He tried to say the fight wasn't just about specific policies like spending levels. It was about the very process of governance itself.
Yeah.
About whether different sides can even come together and negotiate anymore.
That's a pretty fundamental problem.
It is. He talked about needing to rebuild a shared understanding of how democracy is supposed to work.
And the video ends with that image of the cherry blossoms.
Yeah, completely faded by them. A bit symbolic, perhaps.
And of course, it hints that another budget battle is just around the corner when that 60-day CR expires.
The cycle continues. Johnson looking for a more durable fix, Trump issuing new demands, the public getting frustrated.
And we leave Congressman Thornton back in his office, reading mail from constituents, getting ready for the next round.
Learning, adapting, becoming more resilient maybe, but still facing that ongoing struggle for functional governance in a really polarized time.
It really captures that feeling, doesn't it? So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've walked through those intense negotiations, the deep divisions, the leadership challenges,
And that eventual temporary fix with a continuing resolution.
and this whole intricate dance, all this political maneuvering. It really does leave you thinking, doesn't it?
Mhm.
What does it really tell us about the nature of compromise today in a society that feels so polarized?
And maybe what role does our understanding or misunderstanding as the public play in how these things ultimately shake out?
That's a really important question, I think. Something for all of us to consider. And maybe understanding some of the jargon we talked about, budget resolution, shutdown, CR helps a bit too.
It definitely can. Knowing the terms helps decode what's actually happening behind the headlines.
Absolutely. And as we saw, these kinds of challenges aren't going away.
No, staying informed, trying to understand the dynamics, thinking critically, it's all pretty essential right now.